Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Our Talk to Me Tuesday this month is for evaluation to execution, making the most of performance feedback. And we want to kind of dive into this from both perspectives, as usual, how the evaluation process impacts the employee and what the possibility of perspective looks like from the manager, supervisor, or even high level management's perspective as well. So thank you for joining me and Chantrice as always. We hope everyone drops into the comments and gives us some active participation because we have some good things to review today.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again. Of course, I'm Chantrice. I'm the CEO founder of Think Sharp, and we're just going to jump right into it. So, I think what we wanted to go over first is basically what performance feedback is and what's its purpose, right? So, most employers utilize performance evaluations as a benchmark to measure
Mhm.
employees' ability to perform the responsibilities of their role. So, performance feedback is important because it clarifies for the employee and their manager what's going well and what needs improvement. So, this is a great opportunity to also discuss any future goals, strategize on how to achieve them. And then, depending on the outcome of the feedback, it could also lead to promotions or wage increases based on performance. So, I think this is probably a good time to even jump into our first poll question, just
Okay.
understand perception of feedback. So, the first question is, how do you typically feel when when you receive performance feedback? Is it one, you're motivated and eager to improve, two, anxious or uneasy, three, defensive or dismissive, or four, indifferent, it doesn't really impact you?
Use the chat and comment section to provide your response to us, and we'll kind of dive into the options that we see. We'll give it about 30 seconds um, before we dive in. As we're waiting, Chantrice, how,
Yeah.
from your perspective and the roles that you set in HR, what do you see being an average answer for this question?
I feel like based off of my experience, because performance feedback isn't typically done as often as it should be, I normally encounter two. So it's usually anxious and uneasy. You have
Mhm.
employees just feel like, when it comes to performance evaluations, that, all their manager does is point out the things that they do wrong instead of really highlighting some of the things they do right. So I feel like that's kind of the same with a lot of employers. And there are some out there who are doing it right, who are giving that regular feedback. And so when it comes to the annual review process, where it's actually, documented and it goes into your employee file, they don't feel uneasy because they know exactly where they stand, but it's
Mhm.
few between. What about you?
I agree. From an employer or manager perspective, I would say the energy that always came around review time was either anxious or uneasy
Yeah.
or defensive and dismissive. I've had different sets of staff. Sometimes you get a really, really good set of staff, and then
Yeah.
sometimes you get some that are a little more challenging. And what I have, experienced in the past is when you may not have the correct candidate in the role, that when it is feedback time, it there is a energy of dismissive and defense. But I think it does stem, not only like you say, identifying things that they may be need some improvement in, but do I have the right person in the role in the first place? That
That's
probably, in my experience, has partially contributed to that energy being there because they may just not have been the best candidate. We go through our waves of having a pool of people overqualified individuals and then
important.
not being able to find anybody for the role and having to just put a person in the role. So I think it just depends on what the culture already is like in the environment. I think that helps dictate how the culture and the vibe going into performance reviews look like. But we
I
can dive in a little bit more on that, or we can go to the first talking point. How you feel?
Well, I'm curious. So now that you talked about just a perception of feedback and how you've experienced, both anxious and uneasy, and then defensive or dismissive. So, how do you address some of those issues that employees and managers face during that feedback point, that annual review process? Like, how do you address those?
I think, being very aware of your environment as a supervisor and a manager is where it starts. You can reading the room. I mean, it's a lot harder apparently than what it's easy to say. You think
Yeah.
everyone knows how to read the room and can identify what the energy and the vibe looks like, but some managers aren't able to do that. And it starts with the transparency of the conversation leading up to it, and not making it such a tense environment. What type of notices of communication are you putting out? Are they light? Do they encourage for you to, my door is already open if you have any questions
Mhm.
leading up to your annual review? Do you have any questions utilizing the platform? I mean, hopefully nobody's still passing out paper reviews, but if
Possible.
you're using a platform, and do you know how to log in? Need help logging in? Need help with the peer review portion? Creating that transparency at the beginning so that it's an easy conversation, not just your review is due here and then nothing else is communicated against, about the topic after that. So setting the tone for it, I think, is a really good way to kind of minimize any anxiety or uneasiness going into it. But that comes from the manager understanding their department, knowing how to read the room, or seeing, okay, I gave them, to the end of the month, no one has even opened it. No one has even began to do the process. And maybe I need to send something out, or just drop in so and so's office, like, hey, just making sure you're comfortable with the process. If you need any clarity, keeping again that communication open, I think makes the employees feel like, okay, I know my supervisor is active in this process, which means I should get some active feedback. And they're not treating it as it's just a taboo conversation. I think
Right.
reviews turn into one of those taboo things that in the office that it makes people dread the opportunity. But it's all stemming based off of the culture that's being created around it, for sure.
I completely agree.
Which I think dives into our first talking point when it comes to challenges surrounding, the performance review process. And a lot of it stems from, past experiences at that particular company or previous companies. Oh, well, my manager isn't active. They hardly know what I do on a daily basis now. How are they going to be able to review me? It's been scenarios where it's like, I'm training my manager. So how's my manager going to review me?
That's
Or
true.
my manager is not here, not because we are in a hybrid or a remote environment, but they just aren't a participant in
Present.
the day in and the day out. So I can do this self-evaluation all day, but how are you able to provide me with constructive feedback if you're absent from what's taking place? So I think there's a lot of challenges, not to mention the big elephant in the room. Am I getting a raise or not? Because why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I
That's
spending
always the question.
right? I mean, that's, from an employee perspective, you got a 10-page review you want me to do on myself, plus a peer review and whatever else. But am I being compensated here that this is now, utilized? Unfortunately, the review process and raises have been married to each other over the years, when it shouldn't be that way, because
It should
review and feedback should happen continuously throughout the year and not just once and tied to if you're getting an increase or not. So I think that is a really big challenge that impacts participation and the energy associated with feedback, because if it's not related to an increase, what are we doing? I could be doing something else that's on my plate. So I definitely think that that is one of the larger challenges. And then on top of just poorly educated individuals when it comes to the process, being prepared, having the correct information for the person that you're reviewing after the process. A lot of managers drop the ball in that space, which can be challenging. The employee's energy towards the topic can definitely change because you're not prepared. And again, we're wasting each other's time when I could be doing so many other things. But that'll take us into, I guess, our call question number 2, related to frequency and the impact of feedback. So we'll get that one up there. How often do you receive formal performance feedback from your employer or your clients? Would that be weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, or rarely or ever? And I think this is a really good one. And key word here is formal. I mean, somebody may drop in and say, "Hey,
Mhm.
good job on that project," or something like that. But formally documented feedback that stays in that employee file, that can be used in your track record when time to negotiate that increase or that promotion. So it's one of those things when you look at the process of negotiating promotions and increases. If you don't have anything formal that's ever been documented, it's my opinion of myself in this role is that I have been doing well, versus we can look at my last 4 performance reviews. I have always gotten good ratings here. These projects that I've done have been highlighted based off of, making the benchmarks that were set for them. And it helps all around. And it helps keep you honest and accountable for where you're going and where you need to be going as far as you in your positioning and your role. So I would say, if I had to answer this question, I would say rarely or never because I don't remember the last time I have had a performance review formally. Like I said, those drop-ins, good job on that project, you handled that well. Yeah, those happen because it's just a natural, immediate reaction when something positive takes place or something has been accomplished. But
Right.
to what it takes to take the time out to formally document things, that again goes back to where that supervisor or manager is in their organization, their priority levels, and things of that nature. And then, unfortunately, sometimes upper management isn't reviewed as often as they should be. Hence why I have not had a review in years, as the role I've sat in previously is a senior VP role. The CFO just has not done them. Whereas as a supervisor, I've done them for my department.
Mhm.
But that's not always a good thing. I mean, it's very rarely a good thing, because if management, whether senior level or junior level of management, is not being reviewed, the errors or the issues that they may be having will trickle down into that department sometimes. And until, most of the time you don't get CEOs, CFOs involved until they see something start happening to the bottom line number. But it should happen way more frequently than that. It shouldn't take, "Oh, I see we didn't make quota. What's going on in your department?" for you to know your manager sucks and you should have been evaluated them. So that's kind of how I would have answered that one. What about you, Shantri?
I would say in the past, it's definitely been annual because I think the way the organizations I was working with were mid-sized and they were already pretty much trained on how to do this. This performance review, it's almost like checking a box. It was,
Mhm.
something that you had to go through annually. Regular feedback was touch and go, but I found that what worked for me was when I did have those small conversations, when I did receive feedback outside of the annual review, I would keep notes. Like I would say, okay, I was assigned this project. It took me 2 months. This is where it started. This is how it ended. That way I had something to go back on to, reference during annual reviews, because again, so much can happen in a year. So
Right.
the same with, my direct reports. When I did have HR coordinators or generalists under me, I would do the same thing for them. Not all managers can do that. Not all of them have the bandwidth. But I think that's where HR can help, to where you can train your managers on just keeping it in an Excel spreadsheet with your employees and just putting little notes on there with anything that you assign them as far as a project or an important assignment or whatever the case may be. That
Right.
way you don't have to recall all that information when it comes to annual performance reviews, because it's impossible.
It's
It's impossible. I don't care if you have 2 people or if you have a team of 10. You can't remember what somebody did in January when you're doing annual reviews in December. You just can't.
incorrect. You just
There's
can't.
no way to do
No
that.
way. I mean, but what does stand out, just as humans, we remember and can identify something that is wrong before
That's
we
true
will
too.
acknowledge something that is positive.
Right.
So, which is a hindrance when it comes to doing reviews only annually, especially if you're not keeping some level of tracking or documentation. Because you're gonna remember so and so shipped that part to the wrong client because
Yep.
it never happened. But all of the good things they did leading up to that or even after, you may not recall those because it's the expectation. You are expecting them to do their job successfully. So unless it's something that over exceeds, or exceeds the expectation, it's not going to stand out to you. I do think that we should see a shift, hopefully, in this process because a lot of companies are abandoning the traditional this is just your job description. It's very gray area and broad, and we can fall anywhere
Mhm.
in there, to where a lot of companies are becoming very task based because it's easier to be measurable. I
Yeah.
assigned you this task, it has this deadline, completed, not completed, completed with exceptions, whatever. It's easier to measure that. A
Yeah.
lot of these systems and platforms that are being used, your assigners, your Mondays, your HubSpots, like all of these different platforms also allow you to track what is taking place, what the team members are working on, how quickly they're being done. So I think that that will help create more active feedback. And again, eliminate the tie to anytime I'm giving you feedback on your performance, it comes with some type of increase because you
Right.
should be able to get that feedback throughout the year to know what you're striving for. These are the goals that have been set for me for the calendar year of 2024. We've broken them up into subcategories, mini goals for us to achieve each quarter. And then how has that been evaluated when now it's time to look at promotions and raises? Did we meet all of the goals for the year? Did we meet these subcategories in a timely manner? Where did we fall short and how did it? Was it lack of resources? What took place that put the person in a position to where they kind of fell short there? So I think, it's so many different things that come into play that can help add to more frequent feedback, since most people again are just seeing it annually or just
Yeah.
not at all.
I completely agree.
Okay, what's our next talking point?
So we're talking about techniques for basically effective evaluations. And I think one of the main ones that I hear a lot that's missing is just active listening and just asking, the right questions during these feedback sessions. So, what is active listening? It takes practice, because I think oftentimes when you're sitting in a review with your manager, you may be on the defense, like we were saying. You just already know they're about to come and say something about you being late one day out of the whole year, and it just is going to set you off.
Mhm.
But I think during evaluations, you want to make sure, you're paying attention to verbal and nonverbal cues to determine how to respond. Like that's what active listening is. You're listening to your employee, basically go through their review on their thoughts, and you're not already coming up with some sort of response that's going to be, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do XYZ. It's more so saying, okay, so what you're saying is, just to make sure I understand, kind of repeating what they're saying, to make sure that you both are on the same page. Because I think oftentimes, like you said, you go in a defense, or you're anxious, or you just don't know how to feel going into that evaluation, versus it just being an open conversation, and
Right.
the feedback that's given to you, versus just being on the defense.
I
What do you
agree.
think? Yeah.
I think one of the things with active listening and just managers using the correct techniques in these evaluation sit downs are it still goes back to being prepared for me, because I'm not going to waste my time reading you what you already wrote. At this point, I should have reviewed you as well. And
Yeah.
so identifying where your stance is on question A and where my stance is on question A, I'm bringing you up to speed that now that I've read your self evaluation, this is my perspective on this topic. And
Right.
then actively listening to you give me your feedback after I provided you mine. I think a lot of managers fall short there because they're just not prepared. Simone said that she thinks that she could work on her attentiveness to tasks when originally pinged. But she would also appreciate it if the following things would take place so that they're not missed. Okay, I've read Simone's response to that question, and my feedback on that is yes, I have noticed that there have been a few assignments that may lag, and it's good to see that you're explaining to me that it's also because we're using this inner office communication channel.
Mhm.
Maybe the person isn't tagging you and the notification is not coming through. Have you made sure that your phone notifications go off when it's utilized? Or it can be a scenario where unfortunately people don't have good work boundaries and you're getting assigned these tasks at 8 p.m. in the evening where you're not checking it. You know what I'm saying? And then maybe the notification goes away, it's not on your phone or your computer come 9 a.m. the next morning. So what can we do to identify a clear or a better protocol to assigning the task and getting the task completed? Being able to identify how the person has evaluated themselves, provide them with your feedback, and then listen to them say, okay, well, yes, I agree. I do get these pings at 8 p.m. I'm not seeing them again at 9 o'clock because if I open my phone, then the notification is no longer live. And so it would be nice if my supervisor would schedule these posts so that they
Right.
in at 9 a.m. It's fine. Your salary, you work in the evenings because your schedule allows, but that doesn't mean that that's what's happening with me as your staff member. So being able to identify, evaluate, and provide that feedback, and then come up with what those solutions are, I think is a great way to be active and proficient with your feedback. If not, again, we're just listening to each other read what we wrote.
Exactly.
If we're not giving solutions or setting goals, that's the scenario where there's an issue that needs to be addressed. But if it's a scenario where it's a desire, okay, I want to know what I need to achieve in order to be promoted. Let's set these goals.
Hmm.
You should be able to answer that question. If someone says, hey, I see that we may have some vacancy or our department has grown and we've gotten more work, so we may have to, divide some things out. What do I need to do in order to qualify for that? You should be able to provide that information fairly quickly and off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Um, you
If
know,
you were prepared for the meeting, if
if
you
you
were
were
prepared
prepared
for
for the
the,
meeting,
yeah,
especially if they wrote it in their self-evaluation. There's no
yeah,
reason for your staff member to be expressing something that you can't actively address. Now, if it does require, sign offs in different areas or things like that, I still think you can verbalize that. I see
absolutely.
to move forward in this direction. I can provide you with what that job description looks like and comparable to what you have now. Ultimately, this has to run up the chain to this particular person or department. So it's not something that I have autonomy over when it comes to that decision, but giving them the steps so that they understand what takes place in that gray area that sometimes employees don't see because it's happening, in that
Behind
management
the
realm.
scenes. Yeah,
I do think that that's one of the things that, when you think through the techniques that need to take place from the manager's perspective during the feedback, that is definitely a big one. Just preparedness.
I completely agree, which actually takes us into our next poll question about feedback follow up. That's a perfect segue into that.
Yeah.
So, after receiving feedback, do you create a plan to act on it?
Right.
So, the options are one, always, I'm very systematic about it. Two, sometimes only if the feedback is significant. Three, seldom. I find it challenging to translate feedback into action. Or four, never. I don't know how to proceed with the feedback. So,
Yeah,
again,
that one is, I think that this is a good question because I feel like anybody can fall anywhere out of these four,
Yeah.
because it's based off of the environment. I mean, you could be ecstatic about going into this review, and then you get in there and your manager bombs, and it's like, why would I try to put words into action when I barely got any feedback in the first place? Honestly, I don't know what I need to do for
Exactly. You don't know how to respond.
right, because I wasn't properly reviewed. I think that that happens a little more frequently than what we would like, versus there being a more systematic approach. I do think that that is probably a small category in the fact that a lot of people just aren't systematic when it comes to things, but
Right.
not that they can't still create a plan for themselves. It just may not be overly detailed and streamlined and uh,
Right.
to each particular task associated with their scope of work or their job description. But I do think, for the most part, when you come out of evaluation, you make a plan in your head one way or the other. It's a positive one because you had a good experience, or it can be not so positive. Like, see, no, I already see now I need to update my resume. I already
Mhm.
now that I need to, email HR because I want to have a more in-depth conversation about my concerns with my supervisor or my manager. So you do create a plan of some sort in your head, or your manager encourages you and you like, okay, they think I could get this promotion within 6 months if I do these things, and you start to think through your head how to get those check boxes checked off so that you qualify for where you're trying to go. But it is still all based on the preparedness of the situation, so that coming out of that, if it was positive, how you're moving forward. If it was negative, it's time for me to reevaluate the company and if I would like to be here, or myself. Okay, I mean, the time clock don't lie. So if I've been late, 60 days out of the 100, however many working days it is in a year,
Yeah.
clearly I need to address some things. I mean, is it my sleep patterns? Is it because I like to go to $2 Tuesdays? Is it what is it? But I need to address myself because that's not a good reflection of
Yeah.
me as an employee. And if I'm trying to advocate for myself to grow and be promoted and things of that nature, this can't be happening. So
That's right.
how do I correct myself? So I think, but it still comes back down to how it's presented and how the information is displayed in that feedback. But it has been, I mean, I personally have had to have that conversation like, yeah, Wednesdays be a little sluggish for you. So I'm not sure what's happening on Tuesday, but we may need to,
Look,
address,
we gotta reevaluate this.
we have
What's
maybe to
making you late on
yeah,
Wednesdays?
I can tell Wednesday's not a strong
Yeah.
day. And I mean, you're a grown up. It's not for me to say because I am an
Right.
advocate for 50-cent wing night. So I'm not going to tell you to go out during the week or not, but you have to
Right.
be responsible and know, okay, all right, where to draw the line so that I'm not late. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm very task based, and I'm not a big stickler for attendance and you 5 minutes late after 8 or something like that. But you do have some employers that are.
Mm.
And that, unfortunately can weigh very heavily in the feedback perspective because it's just their stickler. Everybody has a stickler. And sometimes you find management will stay focused just right here in attendance,
Yes.
and
Yes.
don't acknowledge your performance. Your performance can be great, but if they are a stickler for attendance, they will hold you back from promotions, evaluate your raise based off of that category, and it weighs very heavily. Things like that. So I think understanding the processes of your evaluations are critical too, because some companies categories are weighted. So if attendance is weighted at 15%, then this might not be the company you need to be at being late all the time because it will impact what your
Mhm.
ability to get an increase looks like. But if you know that this company is very performance based, they don't really necessarily trip on attendance like that, then you know you need to put a lot of energy over here and making sure you're hitting your deadlines, you're performing at the expectation level or higher, so that when they are weighing you for an increase, that you're weighing heavily on that side. And that falls on the employee to understand what that performance weight process looks like when it's time to equate it to your income and your raises.
I agree with that, and I think it takes some effort on the manager's part too, especially when it comes to measurable goals, like future goals. If you're trying to, like you said previously, get to that promotion or get to that position that you have been working towards, and you feel like you have the skill sets. Well, how can that manager help you get there? And they're supposed to be helping you in some way strategize, even though you know internally, okay, I know so and so works in a similar position. I see what they're doing. I know I can do that. So you're trying to figure out ways to get there yourself, but then your manager can kind of push the needle forward with you in determining, what else steps you need to take. Like you said, there may be some behind the scenes things that need to be taken care of. So they should be also helping you. You should be collaborating together to get to those goals.
Agree. I think that kind of dives into, our next part as far as going from words to actions, as that's kind of where we've been. And I think on both parties, having measurable SMART goals
Mm-hmm.
is still necessary. If that is something that, I still write I got a pen in my hand right now. I still write a lot of stuff now. For me, I feel like if I'm not writing it, I'm not necessarily retaining it. Although I use all my devices all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Still some stuff I have to write down. I still write on my mirror in my bathroom. If it's some big things or if it's an affirmation or whatever, sometimes I have to write it and I have to see it. What is that platform? Is your manager putting your SMART goals in ADP? Are you taking them from wherever they came from and putting them on a sticky and putting them on the top, on your computer or on something in your office? How are you visualizing and seeing these expectations and goals that you set for yourself so that you can consistently keep yourself on track? It's one thing, with performance reviews, especially when they're just annually, okay, we set these goals, here go your paper, it's going in your file, and you don't ever see it again. So how
Right.
are you holding yourself accountable to these goals if they're not in front of you?
Yeah.
Because all kinds of things and tasks are going to take place when it comes to your role and your position. So how are you keeping yourself to it? And what's the time bounds that you're putting on yourself for
That's
these
the
goals?
biggest one.
I think that is, and being
Yeah.
accountable, keeping yourself honest. It keeps you honest when you see I should have done this, this, that, and a third by March 30th. That's the end of first quarter. Have I accomplished these things? And then when you get into April and you see like it was 5 things, I got to 3. Why didn't I get all 5? Is it
Mm-hmm.
with? Is it too much on my plate? Am I not prioritizing? Do I not have the right resources?
That's what I was just gonna say.
A lot of
Yep.
time, because of lack of proper resources from my manager or from my organization, to where I can't prioritize because these things are taking double the amount of time because of the lack thereof. So I think,
Right.
again, if it's just in the file cabinet or just in ADP under employee docs, how are you keeping up with them? And God forbid you just don't have them at all. Some managers don't even set SMART goals. A lot of people are still struggling to translate their expectations into something measurable. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if you like give us some of your experience when it comes to being able to translate tasks into measurable goals.
I think when it comes to, I always think about like project based work. I guess being in HR, there's always a certain project and a certain deadline you're trying to meet it by, right? So if you're implementing a new attendance system, because the old one isn't working, people are still being late consistently. It's just you're trying to review it, so you want to get it done within the first quarter. So if I'm partnering with different managers within the organization just to try to figure out, what is working, what isn't working, I'm doing my due diligence. Okay, now that I have all the information that I need in order to adjust this attendance policy, how long do I think it'll take to complete it? Is this 2 weeks? Is this a month? Because we have other things that we have to check, other boxes we have to check.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I measure it. Just the length of the project determines, how long you'll need to complete it. So if it depends on the nature of it, I should say, not the length. The nature of the project will determine the length, and that's how I would measure it to say, okay, do checkpoints, every week or 2 week or so to see where I'm at in completing it, and then by the time that hard deadline hits, where do I stand? And that's measurable to me to say it's time based. This is how much time it'll take to complete it. Once we get to that part, or once we get to that time, have we completed it, all the necessary steps in order to complete that project?
I agree. I think one of the challenges with that, with turning words into action and being able to turn tasks into something measurable, is the clarity around the complexity of the project and what the realistic time looks like. I have had to, in the past, as a manager, reevaluate my position with a staff member when it came to deadlines. And not that they were not qualified for the position, but it was one of those, it doesn't take me as long to do it because I have been doing it for forever, versus it may be something that you've been newly introduced to. So my expectation is you can get this done in 30 minutes, maybe an hour max. Whereas the staff member was like, yeah, no, that's not realistic for me, as I still have to go back to this resource, kind of read over something else, refresh myself, whereas it's just all in my head. So understanding the time capacity of your staff members when setting these measurable expectations is necessary. Now, is it taking you 2 hours because you need refresher training? Or are you also watching your show on Netflix? Because that could just be a
Mhm.
distraction,
Yeah.
and we need to eliminate the distraction so that you can get it done. Or again, sometimes, hey, let me sit back. I just recently was going over payroll with a client, um, and I was watching, and I'm like, who taught you these steps? Like, just curious. And they informed me, and I was like, they definitely taught you the long way to do this. We can cut this in half. Like, I sat back, I actively listened, understood their processes, and then there is a smarter way for us to work. We don't have to spend this much manpower doing this when there is a better way. And sometimes that's the case too. Most people come into organizations and spend less than 2 weeks training, if they get that opportunity at all. A lot of people are thrown into the fire and expected
Mhm.
to perform, at whatever level, when they haven't been there as long as their manager, clearly. So I think sometimes, with from a feedback perspective, how much retraining or evaluation of these topics have we gone through this year? You're saying I'm not necessarily performing to the level you would like me to, but I've only been shown this task once, barely.
Mhm.
Person who hired me or trained me, and they're not even here anymore. So you say it's the task that you may not even do because you've been in your role for so long and you haven't been in this role in years. But I think that if I get some refresher training or some continuous education, that I may be able to increase my productivity levels. I think that is something that's not necessarily addressed during the performance feedback process. That should be, because sometimes it does take a little bit, especially if it's not something that's being done every day. If it's something
Right.
done every once in a while, it may not sit at the front of your head, and you may need to be refreshed on it.
Those are very, very good points. Very good points. So I guess that will take us into our next poll question. Uh,
Yes.
Feedback implementation barriers. So,
Okay.
what is your biggest challenge in implementing feedback? Is it number one, understanding the specifics of the feedback? Number two, prioritizing which feedback to implement first? Three, lacking the resources, time, tools, support to make changes? Or four, overcoming personal feelings about the feedback?
Mm, these are good ones.
These are good.
I like these. I think, depending on the perspective, I think for me, it's always been prioritizing what to implement first. I love feedback because I don't like to be stagnant. I think I always have room for improvement, regardless of how long I've been doing something. And as technology in our industry changes, am I using the right platforms, to expedite and organize these processes? And then when you have a list of 20 things, which one is first? How do
Yep.
I weight the priority level and implement what changes, especially like from our perspective when we're in HR, if we're gaining a new client and we've gone through that HR audit process and we're providing feedback to the client. I've identified 1,000 things that need to be done. But we
Yeah.
have to have a starting point. We have to figure out where we're going to implement this first, because once this is done, the next things will come a little easier because we've created an overall process or policy that will kind of help uh, streamline, consistently. So if I had to choose that, and what to implement first would be my selection for that poll question. What about you, Shantry?
I feel the exact same way about prioritizing, because what you feel may be the most important task, maybe your manager doesn't feel that's the most important. It just really depends on, what the communication is between you two when you're setting these goals. And I think making sure you have a clear understanding of that is vital moving forward, because if you don't understand, if you take it upon yourself to feel like, well, this particular task, I feel is more important to get it taken care of first, and your manager is on a completely different page, then you're really not aligning on what you're supposed to be accomplishing throughout the year. So I think prioritizing is a huge one, but then also not having any personal feelings about feedback. And I know that's hard to do if you have a manager who's not administering it correctly, especially if they're more so showing negative feedback versus actual, like, constructive feedback. They're not giving you facts. They're giving you more so feelings.
Yeah.
They felt some type of way about you coming in late, like we said. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not actionable feedback. It's just they're in their feelings about how like I said, you came in 15 minutes late a couple times when, you're supposed to be there at 8 a.m. You show up at 8:15, and it only happened a couple times, but they're in their feelings about it, and they decided to bring it up during the performance evaluation versus, I feel like you said, if it's weighted to where you have to be on time, every day, then you need to pay more attention to that versus, them constantly just pointing out
Right.
negative feedback.
Especially if you're still a good performer. I mean, again, that you have to know your organization and read the room, because everybody still doesn't equate, oh, you did get all your stuff done even though you were late. They still
Hang that
value
over your head.
reality a different way. But you have to understand your audience and who you're dealing with. And I think that goes into not taking it so personal, because if I know I have a bad manager, and I know, I mean, I've been here 3 years, my reviews always go like this. This doesn't justify it, but why am I taking this so personally when I know my manager needs training? My manager needs continuous education. I know they deliver information poorly. I know they did not prepare for my evaluation. So why do I have such personal feelings about it? Because I've also been presented with options when it comes to this. Find somewhere else, address their supervisor, go to HR and express my displeasure with how my performance feedback is going. If I'm choosing not to do any of those things because of what may trickle down from them, I shouldn't necessarily be in my feelings all that much, because this isn't a surprise. I already know that this is how my manager is going to be. So again, the ball is in my court when it comes to how I want to continue to present myself at this company. Am I going to start quietly quitting? Am I going to do the bare minimum, or am
Yeah.
I want to be here and I want to grow, so I'm going to take this. It is time. I've given it more than one opportunity to see if my manager was going to do better the next go round. I don't see that I'm getting the proper feedback for me to continue to grow with the organization, and it's time for me to have a higher level conversation.
Right.
Not to get somebody terminated or whatever, but in order for me to continue to strive and meet my quota or whatever the expectations set for me are, I at least take it to that next level. Now, if you take it there and you realize this person has been here for years and nobody's ever going to say something to them, that lets you know, is this the place for me? Am I comfortable coming and just getting my check and going head on about it? Or I don't see growth in the direction I wanted because they're not addressing things from the head down,
Mm.
and maybe I need to start reevaluating. All of these are things that we have to take into consideration coming out of these performance feedbacks. And again, if they're done correctly or not, the ball is in your court on how you would like to move forward. If it's a measurable plan of action to leave, what does that look like? I'm going
Yeah.
to applying for jobs for this amount of time. I need to save my PTO because I might need to use that to go on interviews. Like, you're still going to come up with a plan
Yeah.
after you
Exit
come.
strategy.
There's yes, sometimes you have to think of an exit strategy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're thinking of a way to negotiate your promotion or counter offer them back after they give you what your performance review increase looks like. But a plan is going to be set nonetheless, and it is based off of what happens during that process, which takes us to kind of like the execution and follow through. Are you creating an action plan for yourself? Are you, managing your time and prioritizing the way to get through these tasks? And I remember being an employee and it's like, hey, I know we haven't really talked, but I would like to go over these things. You don't always have to wait for your manager to do a check-in with you. It
Mhm.
is okay to
Yeah.
request check in. Hey, these were the tasks I had this quarter. I kind of want to get some feedback from you. Should you have to? Absolutely not. I mean, it would be advantageous for your manager to be proactive in that area. But if you are in a career setting and you want to grow and you want to be able to identify your strong points and how to take your weaknesses and increase them and make them stronger, you're going to do those check-ins yourself. You're going to ask those questions because you want to know how to grow, and not to be afraid to do that. I mean, take your notes, have your questions, even if make your own quarterly check-ins if that's what you
Yeah.
need to do in order to stay on track and to stay accountable and to have internal measurable, goals for yourself. And maybe sometimes you can influence the energy, you can influence the crowd and the department, and other people will kind of move in that manner, which will create an overall better, productivity within the group. But you have to make the decision on, is feedback only going to happen productively if I have a strong manager? Because everybody doesn't have a strong manager. So if you don't, what are your next steps? Are you going to do what needs to be done for yourself inside? But that's my opinion on that one. Chantrice, what about you?
As far as the follow through, I completely agree with everything you were saying. I just cannot press how important regular check-ins are. Like you said, you have managers who aren't trained or who don't feel comfortable enough or well equipped to, have those constant conversations with their employees. So yeah, I, as an employee, feel like that's what I would do. I would put, time blocks on my calendar to remind myself every end
Mhm.
of quarter or however often I feel needs to be done in order to do those regular check-ins, to say, hey, if it's a ping to your manager, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Hey, I completed this project. Can you let me know your thoughts? Or whatever the case may be, whatever the cadence is. I think it's, like you said, important to take it upon yourself, because there are so many managers in a position to influence this type of culture, but who they're just not doing it, or they don't feel like they have what they need in order to do the follow through with their employees, or maybe they're just overwhelmed in their day to day that they just, it could be so many different things why they're not doing the follow through themselves. But like you said, as the employee, you should absolutely take it upon yourself to check in, especially if you're wanting to grow within the organization. I
I
completely.
Yes, absolutely. I think that'll take us into our next poll question: feedback culture within organization. How would you rate the culture of feedback within your current organization or with your clients? Excellent feedback is constructive and regular and consistent. Good feedback is constructive, a little irregular, and does not match goals. Poor feedback is inconsistent. No goals are being set. The manager doesn't communicate effectively. Ooh. I'll let you go first.
It's hard to say. So if I'm basing it off of just what I've seen in the past, I would say it's a mix between 2 and 3. I guess that comes as no surprise because I feel like everybody hates
Right,
annual reviews.
pretty much.
But yeah, so I've seen some managers who give really great, constructive, measurable feedback or goals. They just have it to where they communicate effectively with their employees, and they have a mutually equally understanding of where they're supposed to go throughout their career. And then I have some managers who just, like you said earlier, they drop the ball and they don't give the employee enough feedback to where they feel they know how to move forward in their
Right.
position. They feel stuck. They feel like, I'm not given enough information to know if I'm even doing right in my role now versus what I'm supposed to be doing, later on in my role. So I've seen both. What about you?
I've seen all three as well. I think, on average, it's a little bit of both. Like some feedback may take place in the actual meeting, but then you don't have any goals. You don't have that measurable information to take out of the meeting. We're going to have this one on one. Everything's good. And then where do we go from here? I just won't talk to you or get feedback again for another 12 months. What's really taking place? Because I do think ultimately managers want to provide the feedback. I just think the proper setting and organization that needs to go behind it isn't always executed effectively and
Mhm.
efficiently for the employee to know how. And again, as a manager, understanding that your processes and how you handle may be different. Every person, every employee is different. So whereas we can have a conversation and I after this am going to make my notes, go in my office and say, okay, so we know we did good here, da 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 da. I'm going to set these. You have some people that are very self motivated and can create goals for themselves based off of the conversation, and then you have some people that know they're not going to do that. You need
Handholding.
to set those goals. Hey, here I've already printed the goals out for you. Take notes as we're talking and we're going through our feedback. Ask me questions if you don't understand the goal that is being set for you. But again, it comes back to that transparency and the communication. Is it being communicated effectively to the employee that I do have an open door policy? I set these goals for you, but if we need to dive into, okay, I've looked at goal number 3 you set for me, just looking at the amount of time it's going to take, can we split these into 2 sub goals?
Yeah,
Where does the communication after the initial meeting continue? Because if you just shoo them out your office and hope for the best, you may not see the outcomes that you're looking for, and especially if you didn't put anything in writing for them. So if it ain't in writing, it don't exist to me. So
basically.
you need to put it down.
Many HR rules. If
Right.
it's not documented, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. It didn't happen. He say, did I tell you that those were your goals? I did. I gave you 10 goals. You don't remember? Like it turns into those type of things where there's
Yeah,
no clarity because it wasn't documented the way it needs to be. Every time something's documented, it's not because it's a disciplinary action.
right.
This is an accountability tool more than
Yep.
anything. And especially when it comes to these performance feedbacks. I mean, if as an employee, I want them documented because when it's time for Simone to negotiate her salary, I'm one of those. I got a PowerPoint and I got all my paperwork. Everybody their own copy. It's binded with a cover page. Like we're pointing it
I
out
can see
because
that.
the facts are there, and I'm only here for the facts because my opinion of why you should move me to this position or whatever is one thing, but me proving to you what my
But
capability level is something completely different. So I
yeah,
I mean, even in moments I have some self-evaluations that have never been evaluated, but I'm still evaluating myself. Uh,
yeah,
where can I improve? What am I putting too much on my plate? Being realistic about my bandwidth,
that's
um,
right.
things of that nature. And I just still think it's always two-sided. It falls on the staff member, the employee, and it falls on the manager. But It's so much we can dive into, when it comes to the actions after feedback. Hopefully we covered some really good examples of some things that both managers and employees can kind of take into consideration and go back to your manager and say, hey, yeah, can we start scheduling some touch bases? Or I wrote these
Mhm.
goals down based off of my interpretation of our last performance feedback, but can you give me some insight, within the next week of what you think about these goals, add to them, or tell me this can be pushed out a little bit further, so that we can make sure we're aligning with our
Yep.
expectations, your expectations of me, and my expectations of how I want to continue to grow. So I think that it's a lot, and hopefully everyone was able to take something from it today. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to respect everyone's time and close out right here at 1. You will catch us again for Talk to Me Tuesday, the last Tuesday in March. I think that's the
See the
March
26th.
6th. Yep.
Yep.
Same time, same place.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.